George already been a world traveler since he was 7 years old when his family, his missionaries, headed for Asia. He graduated from high school in Japan. He came back to this country for college at Davidson, got his PhD at the University of Virginia in international relations that he's been so involved in ever since. He spent a little time in the Army and began to pursue an academic career, professor of political science at Capital University in Columbus, Ohio, but moved to Atlanta in 1978. The major portion of his career was spent with Friendship Force. And again, a lot of you will know about that International Citizen Exchange Organization, people to people programs in more than 60 countries. He was involved with that 23 years, 13 years, 9 as president and CEO before he retired from that in 2013. But for George, as for many of us, retirement hasn't been very retiring. He's continued to be really busy organizing travel, planning and leading trips, both domestic and international, multiple times a year, trips for lifelong learners.
Okay, thank you. I'm unmuted, I hope.
Yes.
I think my wife and other members of my family wish there was a mute button all the time they could push, but right now it's by Zoom only that you can mute and unmute each other. But I'm delighted to have this invitation. It's great to share with so many neighbors. I'm sure we live over on Ridgecrest Road, everybody's favorite cut-through road. Been here 39 years now, and so I have a lot of connections in the Druid Hills, Emory neighborhood. But you know, I have been involved in travel all my life and professionally, and then since I retired. And so, like many others, the COVID hits us in different ways. And the isolation, and when this began in March, I think none of us really appreciated the length or the severity of the isolation that would come. And I did have to cancel my trips. And I think for those of us, and you know, for people that are retired in this country and other countries too, travel ranks right up there at the top of what people want to do when they're retired. So I'm sure a lot of you are involved actively in travel. And so when it came down all at once, the question is, you know, how long is our travel going to be disrupted? And what's it going to be like afterwards? Will travel be substantially changed? It made me recognize that over the last 20 years or more, we being Americans and we being professionals that have had the good fortune to retire healthy with some bank accounts, PIAA and others did pretty well for us. The travel has been important. We've taken it for granted. In addition to having the good health and the resources to travel, we've lived in a world in the last 20 years where travel has been open. The world has been really open to us. Sure, we have to get a visa every now and then, but basically compared with earlier generations, it's been relatively easy to travel. So we've taken it for granted. Where are we going this year? Europe, Africa, Asia. We've kind of assumed we could do that. Now that's been blocked out. And as I thought about this back in March, I was thinking, well, is there anything we can do in the meantime as we wait for real travel to return? And the idea of armchair travel kept coming back to me. But I must confess it came back a bit slowly because traditionally I've not been big on this concept. I think in part because of two things. One is I have memories as a boy, maybe some of you do too, of sitting in long, boring presentations, slides or home movies of people going through their vacation and you're sitting there and, oh, gee. And it's both boring and, you know, it's not me, it's someone else's travel. So how does that relate to me? The other thing that I've not liked about the idea of armchair travel is it has a connotation of you're over the hill, you're on the porch with a rocking chair. Now we have a porch and a rocking chair in our mountain home, so it's not all that bad, but still the idea that somehow you would defer armchair travel at our age to when real travel is no longer available. I'm not quite ready for that. But the more I got to think about it, I thought, well, maybe there's a way that armchair travel could be kind of reimagined by us during this pandemic era to give us some pleasure out of the notion of travel without actually having to go on travel. So I tried to come up with with the new definition. This is my logo. Jill, an artist, crafted this for me. But this is the definition I came up with. An armchair traveler, note that the definition is not armchair travel, but armchair traveler. An armchair traveler is a person who uses their mind and imagination to travel the world across geography, cultures, even across centuries. Armchair travel is personal, based on individual experiences and interests. So the idea here is that we're not sitting back just watching someone else's travel, but we're somehow engaging our own interest with travel and pursuing that in a more active way. And as I thought about it, I thought, well, there are three requirements in my armchair travel definition. One is to relax, second is to explore, and the third is to reflect. So let me begin just briefly on the relax part. You start with the armchair. So in my idea of armchair travel, the armchair is not just symbolic, it's real. So you need to have a place where you can say, this is where I do my armchair traveling. Now, in my case, you can probably see this big chair. If I were to get up, you'd see it's a big old lazy boy. It's my dad's chair. It's in his den. He would watch the news, drink his coffee, read the newspaper, probably take naps. When I inherited it, Jill says, oh no, you're not bringing that into our house. It's too big and too ugly. Well, I have to admit that it is big and it is ugly, but it's very comfortable. And so I have this little study in our house, and so it fits in here. And I thought, well, this is ideal for armchair travel. It reminds me a little. I don't know if any of you had the opportunity. I never did, but I saw them. And remember in the old days, the 707s, when the first planes that Pan Am would fly on their around the world flights. And if you rode on those planes as I did, but not in first class, you'd walk past the first class and they'd be these big chairs like this in first class. So when I do my armchair traveling, sometimes I imagine I'm in Pan Am 1 back in the 60s. I've got my comfortable chair, got my cup of coffee if it's in the morning. Remember, it's relaxing. You know, real travel is not always relaxing. It can be exhausting. So one of the advantages of armchair traveling, you can relax. You got your coffee. You know, if it's in the afternoon, maybe something else. You know, that's up to you, but it's still morning here, a few minutes, so I'll stick with the coffee. So to relax, and so I would encourage you, if you're thinking about armchair travel, to really take seriously the idea that relaxation is important, and to find a place. Now, it may be when you use your computer, you'll be at your desk or somewhere else. But you'll see as I move through this that my idea of armchair travel, it's more than just sitting at the computer. And so you want to have a comfortable place to do your armchair travel. So that's the starting point, is the relaxation. The second element for successful armchair travel is to explore. And this is something that we, particularly people who've been associated with university work, we're used to doing that. We're used to doing research and digging in. And when we travel, we like to explore. And that really is at the nature of our travel very often, that we'll go and we'll want to see the place. Probably some of you, I've got this whole bookshelf of, if you see it, a whole bookshelf of travel books and guidebooks. Some of you probably follow Rick Steves, travel off the beaten track. So we like to explore, not just to see the superficial sites, but to go deeper than that. So for armchair travel, I think you can continue that exploration. And really, I think it's possible even to go a little deeper than you would in person. So if you're traveling on a tour and you're somewhere, and there's something in particular on the itinerary for the day, let's say you're in London, and on the itinerary in the morning, Westminster Abbey. So you go there, kind of crowded because usually there are tour groups coming and going. There may be 5 different choirs from the United States up there having their 10 minutes of fame singing at Westminster Abbey. You have a nice, tour guide that tells you about it. You spend a little time walking around, and then you're on to the next site. Maybe it's the Tower of London. So you're there in person. And there's nothing really that replicates that, I don't think, being there in person. But if you're doing armchair travel and you're interested in Westminster Abbey, you can go a lot deeper in your exploration. You can find out the history of it. You can delve into some of the lives of the people that are memorialized or that are buried there. You can look at how it's been involved in British history for so long. And so the idea of exploring is in armchair travel is to take advantage of all the resources and then to find out what you're interested in and then pursue that. So one way to explore it, there are many different ways to explore a destination, but if you think about themes that we may be interested, history, architecture, art, music, cuisine, religion and culture, geology, all of these, this is just an example of themes that we can use to explore for our armchair travel. And we can start out, maybe we have a very superficial knowledge or interest in something, or maybe it's something that we've heard about that we want to learn about, and so we start digging in. Well, how do we do this? In today's world, I think one obvious resource is internet. It's just incredible amount of information that can be called up so quickly. And I'm just amazed at what you can do with Google. Here's just three sites that I found, just examples of armchair travel type sites. There's one called the Armchair Travel Company. Then there's one, Armchair Travel, 45 Ideas, Travel Without Leaving Home. Conte Nast Traveler Magazine, the ultimate guide to armchair travel. So it's sites like this that you can find can take you virtually anywhere. There's museums. And I think one of the things, the museums, you can have tours of the museum, but you can also dig deeper. You can go, if there's a work of art that you're interested in, a single work of art, you can go on the internet and find a lecture about that art at that museum where the work of art is displayed. So the internet, tremendous resource for, I think, for digging deeper. And I would encourage you not just look for the surface kind of ones where you have a 30-minute tour of the Louvre, but rather when you stumble upon a work of art that's at the Louvre, then go there and dig deeper at learning about that particular work of art. So the internet is one, but I'm a little old-fashioned in that I also have an inclination towards books. And I want to show you, if I can pull it up real quickly, just a short video.
My name's Roger Gale. I'm, amongst other things, the proprietor of Amicus Books in Vancouver, which is a sort of a backyard by appointment. I like to call it a secret bookshop. My great passion is travel books. I love traveling. I think armchair traveling is a very nice way to spend a rainy evening. There's something about the narrative and the adventure. My ideal guidebook would take me on a journey into something a little more subterranean about a place or a culture. And it wouldn't guarantee me access to anything, but it would point me off the beaten track. Books make me want to go places. If you have somebody who's written well about a country, you have a certain affection that is deeper than skin deep. It's something that makes the journey more rich even before you've started. It's new horizons and adventures.
What I like about that little video is it's old-fashioned, and it shows kind of how you can stumble on things. But there's a lot of different ways to think about books and armchair travel. Here's a couple that one whole genre of writing is travel writing itself. So it's not about places as much as stories that writers weave for us. Here's a couple of classics, I think. On the left, you see a book from the 1970s, In Patagonia by Bruce Chatwin. So this is a story of Bruce Chatwin going on really a family journey, searching for some distant relatives, evidence of different relatives, but he goes all the way through Patagonia, telling his story, but also the story of the people he meets along the way. So if you're interested in Patagonia, this is a great book. The book in the middle, probably many of you are familiar with, John Steinbeck, Travels with Charlie in Search of America, written in the early 60s about a journey he took in his pickup truck with his dog Charlie, talking to people and kind of trying to discover this great country. That's in the early 60s. The book on the right is a newer one. Probably many of you have been to Machu Picchu. Turn right at Machu Picchu. So this is a book by Mark Adams, who really tells the story of the Incas and the original story behind Machu Picchu. He tells a story about how this was rediscovered by the Yale historian 100 years ago. And then he tells a story of him following the footsteps of the discovery. Now, discovery that Machu Picchu never got lost, but it got lost at least in the memory of the outside world, particularly the North American outside world. So this is just an example of a genre of books. You probably have ones that you've read. I find it fun in terms of our season of Armchair Travel to go back and pick up some of these and look at them again. So explore travel through travel writing. But then there's a lot of other ways to do through books, fiction and nonfiction. On the left, here's a book by Ken Follett. Ken Follett's a great British mystery writer, but he's written a series of books, beginning with The Pillars of the Earth, about really the construction and life over 600-700 years of the Salisbury Cathedral. He doesn't call it the Salisbury Cathedral, but it's built around that. It's Kingsbridge, fictitious town. But it's historic fiction in that it really traces and brings to life what it was like in those days for the construction of that great cathedral. But more than just the construction, the life of the people, why it was built, the relationship between the kings and the nobility, the ordinary people. It's just a great book, I find, and it kind of brings to life my interest in that part of England too. Book in the middle is very different. Some of you may know the work of Donna Leon. She's a detective story writer, and her detective is an inspector in the city of Venice, Italy, and she has a whole series about him. Each book is a mystery, like any other whodunit. There's a crime that has to be solved. There's a tension between the good guys and the bad guys. But in doing that and telling her stories, she tells the story of Venice today in terms of the culture, the bureaucracy, the cuisine, the ecology. All of these things come out in her book. One of the reasons I like the book is that in addition to the mystery, it kind of paints a really interesting picture of Venice. The book on the right, many of you may be familiar with the work of Stephen Ambrose, popularized American history. Undaunted Courage is a story well told, I think, of the Lewis and Clark expedition, 1803, 1805. And so here's an historical account of that great saga. And from Armchair Travel, so if you read a book like this, so you may read Undaunted Courage and say, oh, I wonder what you can do there today. And so then you go to the internet or get other books to find out what kind of travel experiences are possible going up into that part of the world. For example, you can take a river cruise from Portland, Oregon, up to the Columbia and the Snake River, or you can take a land trip from St. Louis all the way over to Portland, following the Lewis and Clark route. So there are national monuments all along the way. So if you're interested, you read the book, you get interested in maybe a certain part of it. Maybe you get interested in the Native American tribes that made possible that great sojourn. But it's a way to kind of combine reading a book of nonfiction with the kind of travel that might be possible these days. And sometimes you kind of stumble on things. I have a book. It's the World Atlas of Food. Now, I'm not a cook. Jill's on with us and she'll tell you I'm not a cook. I'm not a bad dishwasher and I love food, but this is the World Atlas of Food. It's an old book. Well, I'll go ahead and show you. If you look carefully, can you see the inscription there? I hope there's no one from the Emory Library on. It says Emory University Library, May 19, what is it? May 2nd, 1975. Now, I don't know how I came about to have this book. At first, I was worried that someone might think I took it out. How would you take this out of the library? But the date is 3 years before I moved to Atlanta, so I can't be the one that was responsible. But it's an old book, but what it is really a global book of cuisine. And you go through it, and it goes through the whole world telling about the cuisine, but not just recipes, but kind of the history. And you get a feeling, just if you pick up any page of this, recognize how the food we eat is so connected with the geography of where we live. And so the history of how people have developed food in that region and made it what it is. So you come to like Italy, we think of Italian food as Italian food. Well, this book, they've got 6 different regions of Italian food. And so you can go through, learn about each region and what makes the cuisine there, particularly unique. But one of the, so you may, if you're interested in food, you can find out things about the food, or if you're interested in a region, then you may go in the direction of that. One of the things that's intrigued me this year is I've kind of done more of my own armchair traveling, somewhat out of necessity, but also out of pleasure, is that one thing can lead to another. So I came across a book, Eiffel's Tower, by Jill Jones. And it's a story of the building of the Eiffel Tower. And I thought, well, that might be interesting to learn about that. I've been to Paris, I've been up the Eiffel Tower, but I don't know much about the background other than it was built for the great exposition of 1889. And it's supposed to be temporary for 20 years and it's still there today. So the book about this, and the book's pretty good. But one of the things that I stumbled upon was something I didn't know at all. And that is that Gustav Eiffel, the developer of the Eiffel Tower, is also the man who designed and built the interior structure of the Statue of Liberty. Did you guys know that? Maybe some of you did, but I bet some of you didn't. So, wait, what's that all about? And I found another book. It's a book called Enlightening the World. The creation of the Statue of Liberty. And it's a fascinating book. And so I was drawn from kind of a superficial kind of reading about the Eiffel Tower to more in-depth look at the Statue of Liberty. And the whole question came up, particularly in this year in our part of the country, is that, well, what about historic monuments? What makes a monument an enduring monument? So we have our Stone Mountain and the question of what to do with Confederate monuments. All that kind of thing. But then we have monuments like maybe the Eiffel Tower, the Statue of Liberty, which seem to be enduring. And what is it that makes them enduring? So in my case, reading about Eiffel Tower, something about Statue of Liberty, and think about it, if we were at the Eiffel Tower and had a tour of the Eiffel Tower, maybe they would mention that. Oh, you're from America. Did you know that Eiffel designed the interior structure that holds up Statue of Liberty? Oh, that's interesting, and we would have gone on to the next place. But with Armchair Travel, you can say, "Oh, time out! I want to find out about the Statue of Liberty," and so we are able to do that kind of exploration. So we have with Armchair Travel. Remember, the first requirement is the relaxing in your armchair. The second is the exploring. And here we know how to do the exploring. It's a matter of becoming intentional about it and thinking about, well, I really like to know more about this place or this theme, and taking the time to relax and to do that exploration. And, you know, the one thing we have plenty of if we're retired during COVID, and that's lots of time. And so I think it's a great opportunity then to do this armchair travel. But there's one more. Remember, relax, we explore. As I said, one thing can lead to another. Here's on the screen here the two books, Eiffel's Tower and Enlightening the World. You know, the original name for the Statue of Liberty was Liberty Enlightening the World. That was the official name that was given it by the designer. Later became renamed Statue of Liberty. So one thing can lead to another, but the third requirement after relaxing and exploring is to reflect. And this is important for me, that I think that if you think about all the travel well, let me put it this way. We've always heard the phrase, and we've told it to our students and to our children and grandchildren, that, you know, that travel is so important. Travel is enlightening. Travel can really change your outlook on life. It can be any trip. You go to Europe, that can be a life-changing experience. We use that phrase or phrase like it all the time with reference to travel, but do we stop to reflect, well, what does that really mean? Is it true? Is travel, or is it just kind of a vacation? Or is there something different about the kind of travel that we like to do? And one thing I like to do is to think about my top 10 travel experiences. And I would encourage you to think about this, okay? So we're of a certain age that we've been around. We've had a lot of interesting experiences in life, and some of those have been travel experiences. And so what I do is to think about, well, what travel days or travel moments, not family experiences like weddings or big family vacations or family reunions, but actual travel experiences that stand out in our mind. And I'm sure you've had them if you think about it. A travel experience that it may have been 10 years ago, it may have been 40 years ago. And you can remember that day or that moment like it was yesterday. Okay, so you start with bringing those memories up. Okay, what was that travel experience? And then try to reflect on what made it so important. Why is it that I can remember that day among all the other days maybe that I traveled on that trip, but that one day or that one moment, what is it that made that memorable? And we do that, I would suggest, for two reasons. One, those memories can be enjoyable to bring them up. The other is that if we can reflect on what made that travel experience so memorable, what were the conditions? What was I doing? What was my thinking process at the time? Then we can recreate additional experiences that might also have that high quality. So top 10, but I never, you know, I sometimes even write it down, the ones that I think are in my top, but I never get to 10. I stop at least at 7 because it's my hope, or maybe I should say it's my expectation, that there'll still be some more, that I haven't maxed out my top 10 yet. You have to leave time and space for others. But excuse me, I'd like to share with you a couple of mine just to give you some idea of what I'm talking about. Okay, so one, if I go back to June 26, 1969, and that's a long time ago, to be able to have a specific day. Now, to be honest, I had to go back a few months ago to get the exact date, but I was able to find the exact day. I was in Europe for the first time. I was traveling with a graduate school classmate who was English. He was from England. And we were driving one day from down in the southwest around Bristol. We were going up to Chester, which is on the border between England and Wales. And we were going through the countryside. This is the Wye Valley. If you've been there, to me, it's one of the most beautiful sites in the world that I've been to. It's just an idyllic kind of place. And it was a Sunday morning, June 1969. We're driving along this river, and we rounded a corner, and there was this great ruins of an abbey, Tintern Abbey, it turns out. I had no idea it was going to be there. You may remember the poem, lines composed a few miles above Tintern Abbey. Wordsworth, not about Tintern Abbey, but just because he was nearby when he wrote them. So I knew that poem. So I had the idea of Tintern Abbey, had no idea that on that particular day, this is what I would see, the ruins of this great church. And that we could go and walk in there. The roof is gone, grass growing throughout the sanctuary, the walls there, the windows open to the sunlight coming in, a few tourists walking around. It was one of those moments. And I think the combination of just spectacular day and setting, but also it was so unexpected. So one of the things that I learned from this was that in travel, we really need to be open to the unexpected. It seems maybe counterintuitive. How do you plan for the unexpected? Well, you can't. But you can in the sense of being ready for that, being open to it, always being open to going a place that's not exactly on the itinerary, to stopping, taking in a place, and to enjoying it and reflecting on it. That you don't want to get trapped, as some tourists are, of walking along with the tourist map and they miss something great right there because they're not looking for it. So for me, Tintern Abbey is a great moment that I remember, in part because it was such a glorious day, but also because it was so unexpected. The other thing I tell people is don't hesitate to return. And so it was a long time, but 47 years later, just a couple of years ago, I was in a different part of England, but it wasn't too far away. I said, I'm going to go over to Tintern Abbey and see what it looks like today. And these are pictures that I took on October 7th, 2016, 47 years later. I've changed a bit, maybe more than Tintern Abbey has. Now there's a big car park there now. You have to pay to get in. There's a nice gift shop. But I actually went and spent the night at a little B&B close by so I could be out there early in the morning before the tour buses came in. And sure enough, it's still there. And so 2 lessons I learned on this a little bit. One is expect the unexpected. The other is don't hesitate to return to a place that was meaningful. So that was one experience that's on my list. Another is a bit different. Some of you, if you've been to Australia, know that this is what the Australians refer to as the Red Center. It's Uluru, used to be called Ayers Rock. It's this great outcropping. It's not Stone Mountain, I'll tell you that. And I've been to Australia when I was working with the Friendship Force probably a dozen times, but on different businesses, for conferences and for meetings, never to Uluru. A couple of years ago, I took a group to Australia, New Zealand, and we went to Uluru. And I tell you, I had mixed feelings about going there for 2 reasons. One, it's expensive. You add $1,000, maybe $1,500, just go for a day. It's a long flight. You go there, you have the tour, you come back. And so you think, well, do I really want to spend all that money just to go see this big rock and go to Stone Mountain? But and the other reason, besides the expense, is will it meet my expectations? Because I had seen pictures, I had seen movies, I had seen all about Ayers Rock, in the best circumstances. And I'm thinking, I'm afraid I'll be disappointed. I'm afraid I'll be disappointed that it won't meet my expectations. But we did go, and I was glad I went, because you could go there and see it up close. Here you get right up inside the rock, right when it's overhanging. The guide gives you the history of it, not just the geological history, but the cultural history, where for tens of thousands of years, Aboriginal people have seen this as a sacred place. So now you're there, you can touch it, you can hear their stories. And so it was not disappointing at all. And I was glad I went. And it made me realize, don't be afraid to go somewhere just because you know about it. I had a similar experience in Machu Picchu. that it lived up and exceeded expectations. But also to spend that little extra money. I've been to Brazil and Argentina, but I've not been to Iguazu Falls. Some of you probably have been there. It's a similar situation where you go for a day, maybe 2 days at the most, and it's going to cost you $1,000, a couple $1,000 to fly in, have the tour, spend the night, and come back. But I would say don't hesitate to do that. That can create some enriching experiences. But then something else happened, which really is why it's on my list, I think. We did what you're encouraged to do, and that's to go see Ayers Rock at sunrise. There were about 15 of us. We were taken out to this little viewing area, I guess you would call it. We got there when it was totally dark, and gradually the sun dawned and then the sunrise. And I can't remember when I had watched the sunrise from total darkness to when the sun is in the sky. It takes a little while. We're standing there. We had some coffee, maybe a donut, but it's quiet, very quiet. It's in the middle of a hot summer, but that time of day, there's a little bit of coolness to it. And so you're standing there watching this, kind of wondering what it's going to be like. And then gradually the sun's coming up and you become aware of the rock that's there and the fact that it's been there for millions of years, and that for 40, 50, 60,000 years, people have been coming to it in awe and a certain sense of reverence. We don't know, it may be there for millions of years more, we may not be, but anyway, there it is. And you see the sun coming up. And there was one of the members of our group, Steve Bacon, is the retired Presbyterian minister. And I was just standing there, we're quiet, watching it come back. I said, Steve, I wonder if this brings to mind some hymn or some scripture. This is so inspiring. And he said, well, I'm not sure of a scripture, but I think it brings to mind a song. And there with the magic of my smartphone, I get the lyrics up. And I have him read it to us there. As the sun is coming up, you know the song, morning is broken like the first morning. Blackbird has spoken like the first bird. Praise for the singing, praise for the morning, praise for them springing fresh from the word. Mine is the sunlight, mine is the morning. Born of the one light, Eden saw play. Praise with elation, praise every morning. God's recreation of the new day. And so the combination, I think, of being there in the middle of the desert with friends, that's important. Being still and patient while the sun comes up. Seeing the magnificence of this natural occurrence that happens every day. And then sharing the lyrics of this poem, created a moment for me that's been really important. So I would encourage you when you think about your travel in the past to do the reflection. It's not just for memory's sake, although that can be important. Pandemic time might be the time where you go to your old picture albums and pull out the ones that you remember. Or if you're like me, you need to go to those to your cameras and print up some pictures. We've got thousands of pictures that we never look at, right? To maybe pull up some of those that help you recreate these memories. But we reflect on them both because of the importance of the memories, but also for the question, well, why is it that was an important day or moment for me? And how can I be prepared to create it again? So in my case, for Tintern Abbey, the lesson was be prepared for the unexpected. Always be on the lookout for that. Always be on the lookout for that. I can remember being on a cruise and we were in Cadiz, and one day on the Cadiz, we went to Seville. The other day, we were just in port, and I got off the ship early and went into town, and it was some kind of holiday. I don't know what holiday it was, but I got a seat at a cafe right in front of the town square and just kind of watched the day go by as people came in. And so you kind of, but I took the time for that. And so you have to carve out that time. And I think even a group tour, you can find times where you're open to that. So be open to the unexpected. The other is don't be afraid of going to the places that you've heard so much about. So in my case, Uluru, there lived up to the expectation, in part because of an experience that we were able to create that was unique to us. So now when I think of Uluru, I'm not thinking of those pictures, those movies, that I've seen about. I'm thinking about the experience that I had, and that's important for me as well. I'll share with you one other that's maybe at the top of my list. I don't know, but this goes back to another one in England. I've been to England a number of times leading student groups and holidays and stuff. But about 20 years ago, that Jill and I were there with our children who were maybe 9 and 12, 9 and 14, something like that. And we went to, we were actually going to southwestern England to Devon for Thanksgiving to visit friends. We flew to London, spent a few days there doing the tour with the kids, and then rented a car and we were going to drive down to Devon. And I said, on the way, we can go to Stonehenge. And the kids had learned about Stonehenge in school. One of them made a model of it for one of their projects. So we stopped in Stonehenge. We had the tour. You can't get quite as close to the stones as I could the first time I went years before. But still, it was a great tour. And I said, before we head on down to Devon, let's stop by the town of Salisbury. It's close by. And there's a church I want you to see because I've been there several times before. So we're a little pushed up time, but we went into the town, parked the car, walked over to this magnificent cathedral and went in, and we're standing there looking around, and the volunteer docent comes up to me and she says, "Are you here for the full tour?" A very pleasant woman with a smile on her face. And I said, "Oh, ma'am, I'm sorry, but we have to be in Devon for dinner, and so we'll just have a quick look around." I felt a little guilty as I said that, but she smiled, looks me in the eye and says, "Such a pity." And I tell you, I felt like I was being scolded by my grandmother. Such a pity, those 3 words. And I knew what she was thinking, and she was right. Here's another American family. They breeze in and out of this church, treating it like some ancient monument, rather than taking time to learn about its history and learn what it is today, a living institution. And as we walked out of the church, I saw this sign that said, "Construction began on this church, April 1, 1220. Worship has taken place ever since." And I realized, we Americans, the way we travel sometimes, this is the way I've traveled sometimes, we're really making a mistake. We need to be able to stop and take things in and not just see how many places we can check off our list. Now, I'm like anybody else, likes to see as many places as possible, but what I learned that day was that travel, to really be meaningful, we need to at least sometimes take the time to really take in what we're experiencing and not just seeing, make an experience, not just a sight. And so I said to myself, well, I'm going to come back someday and take the full tour. And as it turned out, about a year and a half later, I had some time off, and there was a cheap airfare in February on Delta. So I went back to Salisbury just by myself for 4 or 5 days. I said, I'm going to go not to London. I'll rent the car. Then it was at Gatwick, and drive over to Salisbury and just spend a few days to get to know that church and that community a little. And I found on the internet that there's a guest house at an ecumenical institute that's housed right there in the cathedral grounds, Sarum College. And so I went and I stayed there. I got there, I remember, and shortly after I checked in, the church bell started ringing. And I'm not Episcopalian, Anglican, Presbyterian. I don't know what it means when church bells ring at 5 o'clock on a Wednesday afternoon. So I asked, what's going on? They said, oh, that's called the evensong, the daily evensong service. And I said, well, can I go? Yes. Can I go the way I am dressed? Yes, that's fine. So I just walked out the door, went to the service. There were about maybe 30 people. We're all sitting up in the choir, not in the sanctuary. and sitting down there, maybe half the people looked like they were local people, and maybe half were curiosity seekers like me. And I looked out the sanctuary, probably seats 900 people, I think, and it was empty. Just a few people we were. And my first thought was, oh, the church is empty. And then hit me, no, that's not what's going on here. What's going on here is that this church is almost 800 years old. And almost every day of those 800 years, there's been a service taking place. And now I am part of that I've become somehow part of that 800-year legacy. And then the boy choir came processing in. They alternate between the boy choir and the girl choir, and went through the 30-minute service. But it gave me the sense of both feeling connected and wanting to be connected with that place. So I stayed there for a few days, enjoyed the town, took the tower tour, which was fascinating, learned more about the cathedral, got to know people at Sarum College. And I've been back probably at least a half a dozen times since then. And I'm hoping to go in October with the group. Maybe some of you would come with me. Because for me, this experience, it grew out of really that docent saying, such a pity, causing me first to feel guilty and then driving me to do something about that, as giving me the sense of a connection with a place and people at that place. And so I think, again, that's where reflecting on travel, in that case, I think it has made a difference in how I see the world. And so I think in the reflection that you might do, look for things that were unexpected, look for things that were expected, that lived up or didn't live up to your expectation, but then also look to see if there are some experiences you've had that have created a connection in your life, either by going back as I have, or by compelling you to live your life differently back at home. And I think that's where the reflection comes in. So hopefully you'll be able to, along with the relaxing and the exploring with our Armchair Travel, we'll be able to do some reflecting, both for the memories, but also for the instructive part as to, well, what is it about that particular travel experience that made it so meaningful, and how can I create that again. So to wrap up a little bit here, so Armchair Travel, no exam, but 3 words to remember: explore, relax, reflect. That's how you do it, I think. And I think in this extended COVID season that we didn't know was going to be this long, it's something that we certainly can do. And what I have found, to my surprise, really, is that it's more than just a bridge to our post-COVID travel. That's what I thought when I started. Well, we need something to do, keep travel active in our mind for the next few months. Well, guess what? It's more than a few months, but also I've found that it's a very interesting way to explore and enjoy the world anytime. After all, in a good year, when we're traveling, we may be on the road a month, maybe a little more, maybe a little less. We got all that other time where we can do our relaxing, exploring, reflecting. So to me, Armchair Travel is something that's not just for the now when we can't travel, but it's something that we can do going forward. But we're now 9 months into this. And I think, it's interesting today in the United States, we're getting the first COVID vaccine shots. And so I think, and I hope I'm not being overly optimistic, I don't think so, that it's a long tunnel still, but we can see the end because we know the trajectory of it, that people will get the vaccine, and that hopefully by later in the year will be a position where we won't be homebound and we'll be able to, to travel again. So we are looking forward to real travel, and we don't know yet what it's going to be like. I think we can assume that there'll be masks for a while. Some of you may remember the old yellow shot certificate that we used to have to carry with us along with our passport anytime we traveled internationally. And I think that'll be back. It'll be digital, but we'll have to show evidence that we've had the shot, maybe that we've had a a recent test as well. I think our bucket list may change. And this is the other thing I would suggest that you reflect on, is that we always talk before COVID, oh, I got my bucket list. Where are you going next? What's on your list? I would suggest that as you think about future travel, think about your bucket list. And I would be interested to know, maybe when we have a discussion, how is your bucket list changing? Remember at the beginning, I said that we kind of gotten used to, maybe spoiled into thinking, well, the whole world will be there, we'll be healthy, we'll have money, and we'll be able to travel. Well, the COVID is kind of a reality check. So I'm wondering if it changes what's on our bucket list. And as you reconstruct your bucket list, I would encourage you to think as much about places you want to return to as places that you still haven't seen. Both are important, but I think as I've gotten older, I mean, I've traveled a lot too, probably I think maybe more about places I want to return to than places that I've missed so far. And the passport. Now is a good time to get your passport renewed. In my case, I do, as Gretchen said, I organize some travel programs each year. The first one that I think may be possible is not too ambitious. It's the Hudson River Valley. Many of you have been there, I'm sure, in September. I had to cancel one this past year, so I'm hoping to get that up for September of 2021. Spend about a week. We'll stay in Rhinebeck up on the river. It's just a magnificent part of our country. The history is incredible. The natural history of how the valley was formed through the glaciers, the indigenous Native Americans, the revolution, the history of the Dutch coming here, then the American Revolution, the great estates that are along the river, the Hudson River Valley School of Art. So there's just a lot to take in. And by staying in Rhinebeck, we can take day trips up and back, and it's just a relatively short plane ride. So that's the first one that I'm hoping I might be able to do. That's in September. Move forward to October, more ambitious. I don't know if you can see that heading, Queen Mary 2, Transatlantic in the Best of England. So we've got booked cabins on the Queen Mary 2, which is really the last of the great ocean liners as opposed to cruise ships. It does cruising around the world, but it was designed to do the transatlantic crossing. And so we'll do the transatlantic crossing from New York. We'll go past the Statue of Liberty to Southampton, and then spend 8 days in England, 3 in London, and then 5 back in my Salisbury, staying at the guest house of Sarum College. So I hope that we're going to be able to do that in October, and that it'll be safe and secure to have that kind of trip at that time. So we'll go to Southampton, London, and then Salisbury, Stonehenge, and of course the pubs. But in the meantime, we have Armchair Travel, and hope you get something out of this, and that in the months ahead, when you're in isolation, that you'll be able to pick up some books, go to the internet, and do some traveling on your own. Thank you.
Thank you so much, George. And now is time for Q&A. So if you have comments or questions, raise your blue hand, click on the participants list and raise your blue hand. And I see Don O'Shea is already up.
Do you need to unmute him, or do you unmute himself?
Thank you very much, George. That was a wonderful talk. You were talking about the travel photos that you have, and all the things which you have to dig out. In our case, we moved from a large house in Druid Hills to a condo here across from the VA, and we have essentially boxes and boxes of photos that we've taken. But also, of course, since the digital age, all of these things are a lot more accessible. And the thing that we've done is we got a thing called a photo frame. And the photo frame sits right up here, and it is in continual repetition. Every 10 seconds, it changes. And while I'm listening to you, I looked over my shoulder, And the picture that I saw there was the main drag of Alice Springs.
Oh, yeah.
And
yeah.
we were lucky enough to stay at Alice Springs rather than to simply just make the trip all
Yeah.
the way to Sydney and back. And one of the surprises that we got out of Alice Springs was something which is quite relevant today, and it's called School of the Air. And what School of the Air was that many, many years ago, because the children were at cattle stations, the Australian equivalent of a cattle ranch, they had to be taught somehow. And they started out with radio and mailing the information. So they were doing remote learning about 100 years ago. And it has continued, of course, and it at the time that we were there, it was television. We visited the television station, and mounted next to the school is up something like 10 feet in the air. One of the planes that was used for the moving the educational stuff from ranch to ranch. But anyway, I would suggest if one of the things you might think about is if you can get together your travel photos, and mine had been posted on the web, and put them on a photo frame. Then as you walk by, you'll say, oh, we.
How many? Do you know how many you have on it?
5,000 right now.
Wow, that's great. I really, that's very interesting because my brother did something like that for my mother before she passed away. So she had it by her bed or by her chair, but there may be only 30 or 40. And so anytime I visit her, I get tired of seeing the same ones. So that's great that you have kind of the all of them up there. It's interesting about Alice Springs. We spent a day in Alice Springs and it was by mistake. It's one of the things where they're supposed to have us on a direct flight, but they sent us through Alice Springs, and we had a whole day there almost. And I didn't know about that, but we went to, that's also the center for what they call the flying doctors. So they have, in order to provide healthcare to these remote areas, they created back in the 20s or 30s the system for sending doctors and nurses by air. And so it is a fascinating place, and it's a one city in Australia that has a sizable Aboriginal population. So the Aboriginal people, as you know, for the most part, very isolated, not many remaining. But Alice Springs does have it. So, but thank you for that about the picture frame, because I'm not, it makes sense that you can put them all on there, and it could be a guessing game too in terms of where was that?
That happens.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, Vernon Robbins.
Yes, hello, George.
Hello.
And I are here. Thank you so much. It was a wonderful presentation. You're talking to us during a time of hardship, and it caused me to think about a particular category of experiences. It's not that I like to be morbid, etc., but can you think of experiences where a certain kind of hardship or an unexpected difficulty emerged, where you then explored something you never planned to explore and had certain experiences that were unusual? It's kind of a special category. We have a few like that.
No, I think you're right. I think one of the things that happens anytime something goes wrong on a trip, you hate for that to go wrong, but it falls under the category of the war stories, from the trip. And some of them, now, unfortunately, in leading these trips over the last few years, I've had some. I can give you kind of a comparative narration of hospital emergency rooms in various countries, which you don't like to have. But you have situations like that where something happens, a bus breaks down or someone breaks a leg or whatever. Then you encounter people in a way that, outside the tourist thing. And sometimes you get, it's very heartwarming. You get these connections with people because something went wrong for you. Then others have to step forward to help correct it. What kind of experiences did you have?
Oh, it's okay. Well, we remember the trip across the United States when we came upon an accident with people with their van had turned over, etc. And it was very scary. My wife remembers holding the
Wow.
person whose head had been cut. So then after a vacation, we came back and visited them again.
Oh, wow.
It's
Yeah.
that kind of special connection.
Yeah.
That is a memory, and I can just see that place along the road.
I happened to have a group of Agnes Scott students in Atlanta's sister city, Tbilisi, Georgia, in January 1991 when the first Gulf War broke out. And Jill, bless her heart, was back here. I had these 30 students there. She was getting all the phone calls from the parents as war was breaking out, not too far from where we were. And so, dealing with some of those, anxieties too. But thank you for that. And that does illustrate where you became, in essence, a good Samaritan for those people. Thank you.
Jim or Charlotte?
I wanted to ask a question. When I was in college, I ran across this quote, and I think it was by G.K. Chesterton, in which he said, travel is not education. And I wonder if you would react to that quote.
Well, I'd say travel is experience, and experience can be education, I guess. What's your take on it?
I don't believe it. From my experience in travel, that's why I thought it was very strange. I gather that Chesterton was very much interested in education.
Yeah. My sense was interesting for those of us who've been involved in university programs. When I was at Agnes Scott College back in the excuse me, the late 80s, not as a student, on the faculty, at that point, if you go back farther, study abroad was a specialized experience. It was kind of reserved it was kind of the capstone experience for language majors or maybe literature majors. So this was for the specialist. So when I was at Davidson College in the 60s, if you wanted to study abroad, you go to France or Germany for a whole semester, and you'd be taking, German or French classes because that was done by those departments. By the time I got to Agnes Scott in the late 80s, the idea of international educational experience had changed so that our thinking was that this is something that everyone should have. And so we tried to then create an introductory, that's what we call it, global awareness. And the idea was that even a relatively brief international experience can really be eye-opening. In this case, we're talking about adolescents mainly, and about how going and experiencing another culture can be so enriching. So my sense has been that the international experience can be put into a very strong educational setting. One thing in that setting that we found is it's important, particularly for adolescents, but maybe for all of us, that if you go and have some kind of immersion experience, you need to be able to come back and reflect on it. So what we built was a 3-part program. It was the preparation, the experience, and then the reflection, so that you're able to interpret kind of the experience you had. But I think we've taken together, then that makes a very strong educational experience.
It makes me wonder whether there's an edge to it that is about inequality, is kind of what I hear in that, because it's like, whatever, we that are educated, have more resources, access, whatever, kind of fly in, drop in, we go observe, and we get educated by going to these places, and then we leave after a week or two. So I just wonder about that angle to it.
I think that's an important part, because you're by definition, particularly if we go when we're retired on a trip somewhere, by definition, 2 things. One, we're in the tourist bubble. The other is it's an elitist experience, almost by definition. Now, maybe when we went, I've got up on my shelf here somewhere, the original here it is. Hang on one second. If I can get it without falling down. Here's a book that some of you may remember. Remember this one? Europe on $5 a day. When I first went to Europe in the 60s. And so back in those days, if we're backpacking or really schlepping on $5 a day, we're more, getting into the people. We don't feel so elitist, although in many respects we were. There's another book. I mentioned Rick Steves, who does a lot of travel programs. He has a book called Travel as a Political Act. And he talks in here about the importance of learning, as you say, to try to learn about what's going on, but not just that, to bring that back, and to have that inform our lives in general. So in a sense, not to shy away from getting past the tourist bubble, to get out into the culture itself, but to learn about it and to bring that experience back. So he sees travel having that kind of potential. But I think you're right, and it's important to be aware of that, that almost by definition, both in our own country. So if we talk about the enrichment of travel experience, how great it is travel, let's recognize is that not everybody in this country is able to travel, has the money to travel, or has kind of the educational background to value this. And so that we have to be careful not to forget, how favored we are, in that regard.
Okay, I think Mary Lynn has a question.
Yeah, question and comment. Thank you again. I saw this the first time. I was at the Rohi meeting or the Georgia Hero.
Where are you?
It's marvelous. Yeah, exactly. Oh, sorry. Am I? Oh no, I'm not muted. The Ayers Rock and Alice Springs. I do have one comment about that we were on our way to a medical meeting in Brisbane and decided to go visit Ayers Rock and other things. And Ayers Rock or Alice Springs was where our luggage caught up to us. And that's when we learned that it's important, or at least my husband's bag, that's when we learned that you put things in each other's suitcases. And the first time I went to Europe, I was a medical student, and I spent a month, mind you, in Ljubljana doing dermatology. And Ljubljana was not, you didn't visit, a lot of people didn't go there, and everyone just assumed I was German looking at me because there weren't many Americans. And the signs, it was a tourist place, and they had signs in lots of languages. They had them in French and German and Italian, but not English, and so it was astounding. I had no idea what was going on most of the time. I'd ride the bus and I didn't know what people were talking about, and I'd try to guess what they might have been. So it was I read $5 a day because it was the only thing I had in English. I read the whole of Europe because it was all I had to read. It was quite remarkable, but a great experience. And I would say I like your idea. If we're planning to do this sort of thing in the Emeritus College, which we're talking about doing, is having the pre-planning and the trip and then the reflection afterwards, and maybe even having recommendations for a book to read about a topic. It really could be quite interwoven, fairly elaborate, to have several of these going on to see how they might match.
One of the things that I've found, some people, really dig into the guidebooks and the details before they go. I do a bit, but I find very often is that the deep digging I do is after I've been, because then you're being there kind of sparks your interest. You want to learn more.
Yes.
The Ljubljana, it's interesting now. Slovenia, maybe it was Yugoslavia when you went. But,
yes, I made sure that Tito was still healthy at the time because I was worried.
Well, we were there last year. I took a group on a river cruise from Budapest to the Black Sea. And we went to Tito's burial place. But it's interesting. When I went to Slovenia back 10 or 15 years ago, I said, this is a place people in America want to go because it's the old Europe, but the hot water works. And so it's just delightful.
Where I was staying, the hot water only worked on Tuesday and Thursday. And I put up signs about that, and I carefully copied them out and took them to the clinic with me and said, what does this say? And it says, oh, it says you only have hot water.
The other thing about travel, going back to the question a few minutes ago, when I had students going from Agnes Gotten, also before that, is the thing about having a homestay, and that's what we did with Friendship Force, where you go and stay in a home. That for Americans, that is such an important experience. We're not able to replicate that so much in what I do, but the thing about going into a homestay, particularly if it's where they don't speak English and we don't speak what they, and so you're kind of grappling, and is to learn to two things. One, to be comfortable with ambiguity. It's not
Yes.
on the schedule. And Americans, we want things to be written down, in part because we can do that. I learned this in Tbilisi. I was in Tbilisi with this group, and we had a schedule. Every day it changed, and I'm getting frustrated. And I realized it has to be that way because you don't know what day the power is going to be on, and you don't know what day the museum's going to be open. And so everything just kind of flows.
Yes.
But the other thing, and I would tell my students at heart, is that you have to be comfortable in giving up control of your day. And this is something that's difficult for Americans. We like to know what's going on, and we like to be in control. But if you go and stay in someone's home in Japan, for a few days, you're doing what they tell you to. And at first it's frightening, then it becomes liberating, and, and educational in that regard.
Right. I think Gretchen's got her hand up.
Yes, Gretchen is next.
So you have to unmute.
Yes, hi, and thanks so much, George. As Mary Lynn has just mentioned, those of us who had heard you speak earlier have been conspiring ever since, not only to get you to come join us today, but to ask your advice, perhaps your support, as we move ahead with some programming in the spring that would allow us in groups of those interested to do some armchair travel. And Mary Lynn and Ron Gould, who can speak in a minute to this, are interested in finding out how much interest there is in such programming and pursuing it in the spring. What I wanted to ask you, well, I think perhaps all of what you offered in talking about relaxing and exploring and reflecting, you were thinking in terms of the individual armchair traveler. And I'm just wondering what you might say. We'll be asking you for advice, certainly, and more. What you might say about making armchair travel work for a group. Mm-hmm. That a group could come together over an hour and a half like we've had today and travel.
Mm-hmm. No, I think particularly if you can narrow in on a theme, so it's not just a place, but have some kind of common focus. So like I'm saying, like the Statue of Liberty book kind of thing. Mm-hmm. You have a book like this that people would read a book or an article or watch a video or something, so that you've got something. Or, and I'm just thinking out loud here, or if it is a place, different people could be assigned different elements, which might be fun too. So someone could do the art, someone could do I'm not an artist. Jill's the artist. I'm even colorblind, so I don't help her much. But wow. I've become interested in art, particularly as relates to places. So when I took a group to Spain last year, or the year before, maybe it was last year, there are two paintings that I became familiar with that I really wanted to see. Goya's painting of the May 3rd, 1803, which is a very moving picture of the firing squad and it was a hands up against the wall, about to be shot in the May 3rd revolution, which is still today taken as Spain National Independence Day against Napoleon. And so this great painting that I knew about. And then of course, the other Spanish painting that is Picasso's Guernica, of the huge painting that was done at the time of the bombing of that village. And so to me, as someone's interested in the political history, these two paintings by Goya in 1803, Picasso in 1936, both in their own way kind of anti-war paintings. So if you have a place or a time or something like that, then maybe people can pick up different threads of it to to do little mini presentations of. So I think I hadn't thought it through, but I think that's a neat idea.
We'd actually talked about that a little bit, hadn't we?
People have come up with all sorts of interesting ideas about how to do it.
The other thing you need to do, so let's say you're doing something on Italy, then someone needs to be assigned to do the food part and to make recommendations on the best Italian restaurants, in town. And so I think, along with the travel and the sightseeing, there's always the music, the art, and the food. So those are
and the history
and the museums.
Go ahead,
Mary. Could ask them to volunteer. You know how we are as a group. We might ask them what they want to do rather than just.
Yeah.
And I'd like to get Ron to say a little something just now. Ron has agreed to work with Mary Lynn and putting programming. I mean, he's a great traveler. We see all of these wonderful backgrounds that he has photographed himself from his travels all over the world. And so many of us have done so much traveling. We figure we can come up with some really good armchair travel sessions. And thanks to George for offering to support us in this endeavor. Ron, what you want to say?
Well, you've covered a lot of what I would have said. We'd like people to just start thinking about this and thinking about if they really want to get involved. The number of sessions we're going to have is going to depend on how many people actually want to get involved. We're not going to start until March because Mary Lynn and I are both swamped at the moment. And things got even worse since I first told Mary Lynn I was swamped.
George did suggest that he might have much to share. And so it's possible we could organize something with George's help before March comes along. But yes, by
that's
March
also possible.
and beyond, we'd be ready to start organizing our own sessions. That'd be great. It looks like Rosemary McGee has a question.
Yeah, Rosemary is.
I'm muted.
Yes, this was all wonderfully fascinating. Two things. One is that if we were to do something like that, I think it'd be great to also have the opportunity so that even if people can't travel together, they can travel, they may be able to travel separately and see some of the same sites and experience some of the same wonders. I had to get off for a minute for a phone call, but so if you've already answered this, George, I apologize. But I think in the introduction, it was noted that you had traveled as a child, as a missionary child. And I traveled a bit as a child, as an Air Force brat, and which really had a very profound influence on me. And some of the trips that I remember are from that time, both the good parts and the challenging parts. But I wonder if you see that childhood influence in reflected in the way you've traveled and also the things that you have shared with us today.
Well, I think there must be something like a travel bug that it kind of gets in your system, that it's something you kind of expect. I realize this is the first year in over 30 that I haven't used my passport. Kind of sadly sitting in the drawer. But But yeah, so I think that it is something that, well, a couple of things. One is, I think for some people, if you don't travel when you're young, there's a threshold that has to be crossed. Okay, I saw this with some students, and I've seen this with people that travel with me later on, that if you've never been out of the country or never been out of North America or the Caribbean or whatever it is, there's and the longer you wait for that, the bigger the threshold is. And if you've done that as a child, then there is no threshold. Mm-hmm. The other thing is that I think back on is that if you live in another, even if you're in your own enclave, where it's on a military base or a missionary compound, if you're a child, by necessity, you become comfortable being in another setting. And so when I lived in Korea, Japan, I became comfortable being with people who were very different from me, had different experience, different language, everything about it was different, but at the same time, being able to be part of that in a way. And I think, study abroad experiences for kids or college students can do that. But I think, yeah, so I think the earlier and more extensive you travel, and there are these different thresholds you cross. One of them is being comfortable with the ambiguity that I mentioned. Another is being comfortable that people don't speak English. And so there's different thresholds, and the more these thresholds that you kind of whittle away, then I think the greater the experiences can be. But the younger it takes place. And it's something that as educators, or at least in terms of international educators, that we always preach about the importance of it. But I think for my college students, particularly the ones at Agnes Scott, didn't have any kind of academic grounding in international things that they're going to pursue. This idea that they had a passport, they'd used their passport, they'd been overseas successfully. And that was part of the goal would be to, in terms of the goal of awareness, say, when you finish this program, I want you to be able to say, I can do that. I can get on a plane and go somewhere, even if it's different. And so you learn how to deal with that.
I agree with that. Thank you.
Linda Hubert.
I wanted to thank you, George.
Hey,
I'm an Army brat too, and have spent most of my life traveling, but thinking about what you said in terms of important experiences. Although I've taken students, as you probably know, to Ireland and to Africa, along with you in the awareness thing at Agnes Scott, the most memorable traveling I've ever done is with my grandchildren. And I recommend that to people. Seeing sights through the eyes of your grandchildren is somehow even different from seeing them through the eyes of your own children. And remind you of what it's like to be 8 and look at Stonehenge, or watching them take 50 million photos of license plates. It's just extraordinary. And if you haven't done that, then think about doing it. It's more wonderful than any other kind of travel.
That's great. Thank you, Linda.
I see Gretchen has her hand up again.
Yeah, I can't resist. I traveled once with Linda and her oldest daughter, Karen, and another friend. And one of my memories from that trip was watching Karen watch Equus. We went to a production of Equus, not realizing there was lots of nudity. Full frontal male nudity, not to mention everything else in that play. And there was Karen, and what was she, Linda? Maybe 12? I don't know, pretty young for that. Well, anyway, no kids of my own to observe, but it was fun watching her.
I'll have to share an experience. So real quickly, Jill and I were with David, he was 5, in Tbilisi, staying with this family. And they took us out one evening to the local culture show, they thought. So there's one theater in town, like the old days movies, you go, whatever is there is there. And so when it was like a dinner theater, like this old fashioned kind of nightclub with little, and there's supposed to be this cultural show with, with the Cossack dancers and all that. Well, the curtain comes up and there were these scantily clad women draped in some kind of material that started coming off. And I'm sitting there, and our host family is just horrified. And there I am sitting next to David, and David goes, "Daddy, look at all the colors." I have to confess, I wasn't, well, I'm colorblind, so I wasn't looking at the colors.
So I don't see any other hands up. So I want to thank you so much, George. This has just been really fascinating. And of course, for those of us who heard you at Georgia Hero, it wasn't a surprise that that was the case.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.